Hamilton's climate change adaptation plan. We've been spending a lot of time on what those impacts are that are going to be affecting us locally. And now we kind of want to move the needle into thinking of those high level objectives or vision for the future, as well as start identifying some of those actions as well. I myself am located in Toronto. I work with ICLEI Canada as the climate change project coordinator. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrea and Trevor from Hamilton to introduce themselves, as well as kind of do a land acknowledgement before we move forward. Andrea, take it away.
Sure. Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Andrea McDowell. I work in the Air Quality and Climate Change Office. Most of you have dealt with me over the summer on the risk and vulnerability reassessment. Thank you for making the time to attend today. I'll do a quick land acknowledgement and then I'll pass it over to Trevor. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land, so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers.
Thanks, Andrea.
And hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Trevor Imhoff. I'm the Senior Project Manager working with Andrea in the Air Quality and Climate Change team. And also I chair the Corporate Climate Change Task Force and the response to Hamilton Council's declaration of a climate change emergency. And I wanted to thank everyone for your ongoing commitment to this extremely important work, and just wanted to highlight how this work is directly working to work towards, there's a lot of words there, work towards our response to the climate change emergency, both at the community level and the corporate level. So I'm very excited to participate with Andrea and ICLEI Canada, as well as all of you, on developing actions on how we can better prepare across the corporation as well as the community on the existing as well as future projected climate impacts. So thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Trevor, and very succinctly putting together what we're actually doing here today. Before we get into the nitty gritty, just a quick Zoom tutorial or refresh for everyone attending. Anyone who's come in again, just a little glitch that's happened is you might be coming in as Hiba Kareem, which is my name, must be the link I provided. So if you could just change your name on Zoom to your name, comma, organization, that would be great. We're obviously going to do a fulsome round of introductions when we go into our breakout groups, but it'd be great if you wanted to put in the chat kind of who you are, who you're representing, what organization you're representing. Would be really nice to hear from you folks. And then just a few things, keep yourself on mute for the duration of the presentation. That would be much appreciated. We can unmute and have lots of great conversation during the breakout. If you have a question, anytime we're prompted to have a Q&A, please feel free to kind of raise your hand or unraise your hand or type it in the chat box if that's a little bit more convenient. And then if you're in full screen mode, just again, if you need to kind of exit out of that as we move into the activity, because we'll be using an online platform for that, just hit the escape button and you'll be able to do that easily. And then just a reminder again about our conversation today, we're moving into action planning, really the meat and bones of this process. And so I really want to encourage a lot of open, honest, and safe kind of dialogue together. In this room, we have lots of different people representing lots of different organizations and groups of individuals. And so just want to make sure that we all feel comfortable sharing in this space. So a little walkthrough of the agenda of what we're covering today. We'll do a few brief updates on the work that's been done to date. So kind of some of you have been involved in this process and have heard of the work that was done a few years ago. And then we paused and we restarted again. And so giving you an update of what was done then and now, then we'll run through a bit of an action planning 101. So all things you need to know around actions, what adaptation actions are, what types of actions exist what we can brainstorm together today, some examples of those, and then we'll run through the instructions for the brainstorming actions activity, and we'll head into about a 1 hour activity for that around 2:50, coming out of that at around 3:50, 3:55, leaving a good 5-10 minutes at the end back in the main room to just talk about next steps. So what we'll be doing with the results of the action today, as well as kind of next steps past action planning and what to expect in the months to follow. So again, just an overview of the work done to date. I imagine most of you were involved in the consultation and the work that was done around 2016 and 2017 in identifying what those climate change impacts were as a result of those that projected the climate science that we're seeing. And we did a lot of work on collecting that list of impacts and running it through a vulnerability and risk assessment that you may or may not have been a part of. But then we took a pause. And so some of those results may or may not be out of date. And so once we picked things up again over the last year, we wanted to make sure that those results still were relevant to the community and to the corporation. And so on our end, we've worked on updating the climate projections, and we've been doing a lot of consultations with the community as well as the staff at Hamilton to reassess those results and see if they're still relevant, if the same list of prioritized risks that come out at the end of that are the same, or if we need to update that. And so where we're at right now is that we've completed a lot of the community consultation around the risk reassessment, and we're just wrapping up the corporate consultation around that now. And then as for the adaptation planning framework that we're using to kind of go through this process, it's, some of you may have heard of it, maybe not, it's ICLEI Canada's BARC process, which stands for Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities. It's a 5-milestone framework that, oh, there we go, live transcription, sorry about that. Hopefully you can see that at the bottom of your screen now. It is a 5-milestone framework that many municipalities across Canada have been using to conduct their adaptation planning. And so we've moved through milestone 1 and 2. Milestone 1 is initiating that process, right? Identifying who we need to involve, putting together a team, starting to think about what those impacts might be, and doing some kind of internal work and planning to initiate that process. And then moving into milestone 2, which is research. And that's what we're finishing up right now, or are almost done with. It's kind of continuing to work on those climate change impacts and that science, starting to narrow down those impacts into what is of highest priority, running them through that vulnerability assessment and a risk assessment. And then milestone 3 kind of moving into that now, and where you see that red circle is where we're at today, is starting to plan and looking at, what is our vision for this plan? What are some high level goals that we want to achieve? And what are some actions and strategies that feed into those goals and objectives? And so today we're going to be focusing on those kind of high level objectives and those actions. And then moving forward into milestone 3, we'll look at all things around implementation. So once we finalize that list of actions, we'll look at things like, well, how are we going to implement this? What are the timelines? Who's going to be involved? What are some indicators that we can kind of establish to track progress? As well as write the plan and all of those pieces. And then we moved into milestone 4, which is implementing the actual plan. And then milestone 5 is monitoring, reviewing, and kind of starting again. And so it's an iterative, cyclical process. And so just a bit of a recap, I guess, of the key concepts associated with the BARC process that you've heard probably time and time again if you were involved with the risk reassessment and the vulnerability and risk reassessment. So I keep saying climate change impact. So this is the local implications or the local impacts as a result of a changing climate, that we kind of use the climate science as a bit of a guide of how to think about what the impacts are going to be locally. So if you're going to have an increase, you're set to see increased temperatures, hotter summers, a lot more precipitation. What does that mean for public health? What does that mean for infrastructure? What does that mean for your watersheds, our environment in general? Sort of taking that kind of systems lens. And then we create kind of a long list of what those impacts are, and we need to kind of triage and figure out what our vulnerability and risk to those impacts actually is, as you can't take 40 to 50 impacts into a plan. And that's why we do vulnerability and risk. And so vulnerability, the way that ICLEI looks at is the community's susceptibility to harm arising from climate change. And so it's a function of these two items: sensitivity, which is the sensitivity of a system, asset, population to an impact. So if those impacts were to happen today, how sensitive are we to them? And adaptive capacity. So that's thinking about the ability for us to cope or adjust to that impact with kind of minimal disruption, minimal cost, minimal resources, and kind of return to our previous functionality and business as usual. After that, we run it through a risk assessment, and that's what we see as a combination of the likelihood of an impact occurring, so the probability that that impact will actually occur, and what the consequences associated with that both are, and the ranking of, how bad are those consequences really. So thinking about consequences in the realm of public health and safety, of consequences to local economy and growth, community lifestyle, cultural impacts, environment sustainability, public admin, things like that. And so just to kind of drive that point home, is we run it through the vulnerability and risk as a way to kind of triage that list of impacts. Like I said, you come up with a list of 40 to 60. We've seen with many communities a very long list of what potential impacts could be. But you need a way to run it through a process to see what is of highest priority at the end and then what we need to plan for right now. And so that's what the vulnerability and risk process is like. So vulnerability looks at if this impact were to happen today, how susceptible are we to this right now, and what do we have in place to protect us, to improve our adaptive capacity? And then risk considers, again, that probability of that event occurring and its negative consequences. So then just a quick recap of, I said that a reassessment has been done. So what you folks have done for that reassessment and what we've done to conduct that reassessment as well. So we had those original vulnerability and risk assessment scores. And so either through a survey, you may have participated in a survey on the Hamilton website, or you had sort of one-on-one conversations with Andrea through meetings. You reviewed those scores, and where appropriate or where needed according to your expertise, those were rescored as either higher or lower vulnerability or risk, and you provided some rationale and justification for that. And then on our end as the project team, we reviewed the likelihood scores of all these impacts. So what is the likelihood of these impacts actually occurring once we updated the climate science and the projections around that? And we compiled all the results that we got from the survey and from your conversations. And what we've developed is a bit of a draft list of these priority impacts or priority community impacts, so impacts of community significance. And I say draft because, like I said, we're just finishing up that corporate consultation piece. But these are more or less finalized as impacts of community significance. And so I'll just present them in just a moment. And these are the things I want you to really keep in mind, because we'll be looking at them in detail in the activity and brainstorming actions around these impacts. So here are the draft prioritized risks that we've kind of averaged out from all the conversations and the survey results, the reassessment results that we've got. And I'll just walk through them a little bit slowly so you have some time to absorb what these are and keep them in mind as we work through them. The first is increased temperatures and changes in precipitation, leading to more incidences of infectious diseases and vector-borne diseases. Probably due to that longer transmission periods and kind of the geographic distribution of those vectors kind of moving. The second is a bit of a combined impact of impacts to agriculture that we found came up in conversations a lot. And that's more frequent and serious droughts and extreme heat, leading to a lower availability of food, I guess, and at higher prices of local foods, lowered water supply for irrigation, and an overall kind of decreased or financial impacts to farms as well. The next two that you see that are number 3 and number 4 are a little bit similar in that they both tackle that idea of increased heat, more heat waves leading to impacts on vulnerable populations. So whether that's a financial impact on low-income households, or that's, you know, health and safety related issues associated with anyone who doesn't have access to air conditioning, or anyone who's vulnerable, seniors, youth, or is experiencing homelessness, everything under that umbrella. Then we have that fifth one right over there, which is kind of expecting an increase or changes in the frequency of extreme rainfall, leading to more flooding on private and public properties. So this is pretty typical. We knew this would make the list. And then the bottom two are kind of an increased intensity and frequency of ice storms, leading to hazardous or unsafe conditions on sidewalks, pathways, things like that, or leading to power outages, which also kind of lead to those same safety concerns. The reason that they're in red right now is because the top, I believe, 5 kind of seem to be the highest risk from the conversations that we had with the community. And those 2 were definitely on the list, they were there. But in the interest of time, we're really going to focus on those 5 in the activity. And if we have time, we'll really try to stretch it and pull some actions for those bottom 2 as well. So that's why I wanted to present them and still have you think about them. But just in the interest of time, we'll focus a little bit more on the first 5.